For the debate, Honourable Member for Mississauga-Streetsville.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise to speak to this particular piece of legislation brought forth by a member, my colleague, the member from Willowdale, who has a long and enviable tradition in this House of bringing forward well thought through, progressive, sensible proposed legislation, and this is certainly one of them. Now, I think it's worth starting with a bit of a perspective. We're talking about a profession that in its roots evolved from basically the boss depending upon his or her personal intuition in hiring people to progressing through the function of what was called, as many of us were growing up, personnel, in which the function evolved into a profession. It was a profession that had a set of core principles and that used a recognizable and, more importantly, teachable body of knowledge that governed itself through recognized and uniform standards, and that moved forward through the evolution and the leadership of its peers. And that's where we are today. The profession became such in the early 1990s. I believe it was 1990 that its first act was passed. And in Ontario, it touched that plateau of maturity in being recognized as a profession that was called human resources. So today in Ontario, some 20,000 people earn a living as human resources professionals. And Bill 138 builds on the success of the human resources profession. As their act in 1990 brought the personnel function into the 20th century as the human resources profession, so too Bill 138 brings the human resources profession into the 21st century through being able to enhance the such things as the setting of standards, the enforcement of those standards, the service and certification of members. Certainly you've heard of the CHRP designation, providing a means of redress for members, employees, employers, and the general public, and giving the profession the tools and methods of such professions as accounting, doctors, accountants, lawyers, and so on. So I think a few words here to say what is it that we're trying to do. Now, this Act applies to members of the Human Resources Professional Association only, not those who wish to say that they're out there consulting in the practice of personnel, staffing, or whatever. It will not affect the transferability of the CHRP designation. For members of the HRPA, it won't increase dues or costs. And most of what's in there, the Act merely clarifies. These are functions that are largely done today. This is a piece of legislation influenced by a great deal of homework and consultation. There were some 40-plus communications efforts, articles, newsletters, chapter visits, and so on and so forth over the past 3 years. The profession sought independent expert legal opinions and came to a conclusion that the proposals are in fact good for their members and good for their employers and good for the general public. So this empowers the Human Resources Professional Association to advance in scope, sophistication, and responsibility and meet the organization-wide challenges of the 21st century, where human capital is more strategic in many cases than financial capital. We need skilled HR professionals who work within a framework of rules and regulations that they don't get in their corporate environment. We need them to bring the organization and its stakeholders and the people affected by what the organization does through the full range of expertise that they acquire and use in such areas as setting missions and goals, setting strategies, measuring organizational effectiveness, matching staffing needs to the available labor pool, sourcing strategic skills for the organization, retaining key employees, coming up with a fair framework of compensation and full and proper costing, both present and future. These are all things that HR people do. Training and development, for example, in the IT sector, one assumes that it takes between 10 and 20 days a year just to stay even in your field. And in most knowledge work today, that function of training, development, and employee retention is key, because your primary assets are the people who walk out the door on Friday afternoon and go home for the weekend, and you've got to have them managed and managed well, and that's what the HRPA does. You can't waste people time and money, but you have to manage them, and that's what the HRPA does, and those are the tools and techniques that this Act enables them to advance in sophistication and to enforce and to ensure that in the future HR professionals are getting the best possible association that they can get. So good for the Human Resources Professionals Association. They're providing to the profession such functions as networking, leadership and management development, evolution of a common body of standards, management of that all-important CHRP designation. They're giving people a chance to discuss the ideas, to share some of their thoughts, and basically, as HR professionals, to play a role in advancing their profession, their company, their skills, and the people whose careers that they affect so deeply, managing them with the best possible tools and techniques, and ensuring that here in Ontario and here in Canada, that our organizations manage human resources as effectively as we possibly can. What we've done here is to empower the Human Resources Professionals Organization with a world-class regulatory framework. Good for them. Go forward, HR people. Thank you very much.